I watched my brother Julian lean back in the estate attorney's leather chair, smirking as he waited to collect his $500,000 share of our late father's estate. He had spent the last 8 months cruising on a luxury boat, while I worked 60-hour weeks at 3 different jobs just to keep my father on life support. Julian thought he had won. He thought he could abandon our dad, leave me with $142,000 in ICU debt, and still walk away rich. He had no idea that the piece of paper resting in my lap was about to strip him of every single dime he thought he owned. I was the daughter who stayed quiet, absorbed the blows, and carried the weight no one else wanted to hold. I worked as a high school history teacher in a modest district, living in a small one-bedroom apartment with second-hand furniture and a budget calculated down to the last nickel. I didn't care about luxury. I cared about stability, honor, and above all, family. My younger brother Julian was built from an entirely different cloth. From the moment he was born, he was the crown jewel of our home. Julian was handsome, incredibly charismatic, and possessed a golden tongue that could persuade anyone into believing his lies. He was the kind of person who could crash a brand new car into a ditch, convince our parents it was the road conditions' fault, and walk away with a bigger allowance to comfort his trauma. While I spent my high school weekends studying and helping my father balance the books for his small hardware shop, Julian was out partying, leaving behind a trail of maxed-out credit cards that my father quietly paid off. My father, Arthur, was a good man, but he suffered from a fatal flaw common to many gentle parents. He mistook Julian's manipulative charm for ambition. "Julian is going to do big things, Clara," my father used to tell me, his eyes full of pride as he looked at photos of Julian on expensive vacations he couldn't afford. "He just needs a little extra runway to find his footing." So I stepped back. I let Julian take the spotlight, the financial handouts, and the unconditional praise. I watched him coast through life, hopping from one failed business venture to another, always bailed out by my father's life savings. I swallowed my resentment because I believed that family meant unconditional sacrifice. I believed that when a real crisis hit, the blood in our veins would mean more than vanity. I was wrong. I had to watch my father bleed out his life's work to realize that to Julian, family wasn't a sacred bond. It was just an open bank account with no withdrawal limit. The fragile foundation of our family completely shattered on a Tuesday morning in October. I was in the middle of teaching my second period AP European history class when my phone buzzed incessantly against the wooden podium. It was the emergency desk at St. Jude Memorial Hospital. My father had suffered a massive, catastrophic hemorrhagic stroke in the back room of his hardware shop. By the time I sprinted through the automatic doors of the ICU, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird, the doctors had already hooked him up to a maze of clear plastic tubing and buzzing, cold monitors. The chief neurologist pulled me into a sterile side room, his face heavy with grim reality. Dad was alive, but the brain bleed was severe. He would require round-the-clock intensive care, specialized neurorehabilitation, and constant monitoring if he stood any chance of survival. My immediate instinct was to call Julian. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely type his number. When he finally answered on the 7th ring, the background noise was filled with thumping bass music and clinking glasses. He was in Miami on an impromptu beach getaway. "Julian, Dad's in the ICU," I choked out, tears burning my eyes. "It's really bad. He had a massive stroke. You need to come home right now." There was a long pause on the other end, followed by a loud, irritated sigh. "Clara, please don't start with the melodrama," Julian said, his voice completely flat. "I'm in the middle of a massive networking trip right now. You're there, right? Just handle the paperwork. I'll fly back when things calm down. Keep me posted." Then he hung up. He didn't come back that week, or the next month. While my father lay motionless in that sterile hospital bed, fading in and out of consciousness, the brutal financial reality hit. My father's basic health insurance policy was woefully inadequate. It capped out almost immediately, leaving a tidal wave of out-of-pocket expenses that grew by thousands of dollars every single day. Specialized nursing, daily brain scans, ICU room fees, and experimental physical therapy weren't fully covered. I took an indefinite, unpaid medical leave from my full-time teaching position to sit by my father's bedside during the day, feeding him ice chips, bathing him, and holding his fragile hand. But sitting by his bed didn't pay the bills that were flooding into my mailbox like an avalanche. So I adapted. I turned myself into a machine. From 5 a.m. to 8 a.m., I worked online tutoring jobs for foreign language students. From 9 a.m. to 4 p.m., I stayed at the hospital, talking to doctors and managing Dad's care. From 5 p.m. to 1 a.m., 6 nights a week, I worked as a waitress at a greasy diner 3 miles down the road. I lived on leftover coffee, cold toast, and 3 hours of broken sleep a night. My bank account plummeted to double digits. I drained my modest retirement savings, maxed out my personal credit cards, and pawned my mother's vintage jewelry, all to pay down the daily hospital installments so they wouldn't transfer Dad to a low-tier, understaffed state facility. I sacrificed my health, my sanity, and every single dollar I possessed. And through it all, I kept believing that when the final bill came, Julian would step up and carry half the weight. After 5 exhausting months of fighting, my father's body simply gave out. He passed away quietly on a rainy Thursday afternoon, holding my hand while the steady beep of the heart monitor dissolved into a long, flat tone. The grief hit me like a physical blow, but there was no time to mourn. Within 48 hours of his death, the hospital's accounting department generated the final, consolidated bill for his care. The number staring back at me on the white paper was $142,800 in remaining out-of-pocket medical debt, due immediately before the estate could even begin probate. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold my phone. I didn't have $140,000. I didn't even have $1,000 left in my checking account. I took a deep breath, swallowed my pride, and called Julian. To my surprise, he actually picked up on the third ring. "Julian, Dad passed away on Thursday," I whispered, my voice breaking. "And the hospital just issued the final statement. After all the partial payments I made, there's still $142,800 left in critical care bills. I've sacrificed everything I have over the last 5 months. I need you to cover half of this, or help me take out a joint loan so we can clear Dad's name." Silence hung on the line for 3 agonizing seconds before Julian let out a short, scoffing laugh. "Are you insane, Clara?" he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "That's Dad's debt, not mine. Why would I throw my hard-earned money into a medical black hole for a dead man? You're the one who insisted on keeping him in that expensive ICU unit instead of letting nature take its course. That was your decision, so that's your financial problem. He was your father, Julian." I screamed, the tears finally bursting past my eyelids. "He paid off your credit cards. He bought your first apartment. He gave you everything. And I owe him nothing," Julian replied smoothly. "Don't call me about this again. I'm busy moving forward with my life." Click. The line went dead. I tried calling back immediately, but my call went straight to voicemail. 10 seconds later, an automated text popped up on my screen. Message delivery failed. He had blocked my number. 2 hours later, my cousin sent me a direct message on Instagram containing a screenshot that made my blood run cold. Julian had just posted a photo from a marina in Miami. He was standing on the deck of a sleek, brand-new 34-foot luxury boat, holding a glass of champagne, grinning at the camera. The caption read, "Hard work pays off. Just put down the cash deposit on my new baby. Living the soft life." He had the money. He had hundreds of thousands of dollars sitting in his accounts. He just cared more about parading a luxury yacht in front of his online friends than paying for the dignity of the father who raised him. I sat alone at my kitchen table, looking at the screenshot of Julian on his new boat, and something inside me quietly died. The overwhelming grief, the suffocating panic over $142,800 in medical bills, the endless exhaustion. It all evaporated in a single second. It was replaced by a cold, sharp clarity I had never felt before in my life. I wiped the tears from my face, closed my phone, and realized that being the sweet, forgiving daughter was over. 2 months before my father passed away, during a rare afternoon when he was lucid, he had called me to his bedside. He knew his body was failing, and he knew Julian hadn't visited once. With tears in his weak eyes, he had handed me a key to his small fireproof safe and whispered, "Clara, I made a mistake with your brother. Go see Marcus Vance." Marcus Vance was my father's longtime estate attorney, a sharp, elderly man who had handled our family's legal affairs for 30 years. The day after Julian blocked my number, I sat in Mr. Vance's office with a thick stack of receipts, bank statements, and every single hospital invoice I had paid over the last 5 months. "Mr. Vance," I said, my voice steady and completely free of emotion. "Julian refused to pay a single cent toward Dad's care. He bought a yacht instead. Tell me what options I have." Mr. Vance adjusted his glasses, looked over my paper trail, and a slow, fierce smile crossed his face. "Clara," he said softly, "your father saw this coming. Before his stroke progressed, he executed a crucial amendment to his revocable living trust. He gave you full durable power of attorney and appointed you as the sole independent executor of his estate." He leaned across the desk and explained the strategy that would become Julian's undoing. Under the specific terms of my father's restructured trust, any third party who personally funded the primary decedent's critical medical care had the absolute legal right to convert those expenditures into a formal, legally binding, secured personal loan against the estate itself. "Here is what we do," Mr. Vance instructed. "You will take out a consolidated personal loan to settle the hospital's remaining $142,800 balance today. Once the hospital debt is paid in your name, I will execute a formal, high-interest promissory note and a senior secured creditor lien between you and your father's trust." We set the terms with absolute legal precision. 1. Every single dollar I paid, including the $142,800 hospital balance, the $35,000 I spent out of pocket during his stay, and $12,000 in funeral expenses, was registered as a primary secured claim against the estate. 2. We attached a standard, legally permissible 8% annual compound interest rate to the total debt, retroactive to the first day of Dad's ICU admission. 3. Crucially, we wrote in a clause stating that all secured creditor claims and legal administrative fees paid by the executor must be reimbursed in full before any remaining assets could be disbursed to beneficiaries. I signed the paperwork with a firm hand. Julian thought he was walking away into a $450,000 inheritance. He had no idea he was walking directly into a financial meat grinder of his own making. 6 weeks later, the probate hearing took place inside a sleek, glass-walled conference room at the downtown courthouse. Julian strolled in late, wearing a tailored designer suit, his boat keys jingling loudly in his pocket as he sat across from me. He didn't even make eye contact. Instead, he flashed a smug smile at his high-priced probate attorney, eager to claim his half of our father's $450,000 house and remaining liquid accounts. "Let's wrap this up quickly, Vance," Julian said, checking his gold watch. "I have a flight back to Miami at 3. Mr. Vance didn't blink. He calmly adjusted his spectacles, opened a thick black binder, and slid a set of notarized financial documents across the table directly to Julian's attorney. "Before we discuss beneficiary disbursements from Mr. Arthur's $450,000 estate," Mr. Vance began, his voice echoing in the quiet room, "we must first clear all primary secured creditor claims against the trust." Julian chuckled, waving his hand dismissively. "What claims? Dad didn't owe anyone anything." "He didn't," Mr. Vance replied coolly, "but his trust does. Under the legal terms executed by your father prior to his passing, Clara holds a first priority, senior secured lien against the entire estate for all out-of-pocket medical, critical ICU care, and funeral expenses paid on his behalf. Julian's attorney quickly scanned the pages, his smug expression instantly vanishing as his face went pale. "Wait, this can't be right," the attorney muttered, frantically tapping his calculator. "Let me read the exact totals into the record," Mr. Vance continued. Clara's principal medical loan, combined with her direct out-of-pocket contributions, funeral arrangements, and accrued 8% compound interest, totals exactly $225,400. Furthermore, under state probate law, executor administrative costs and legal fees totaling $15,000 take secondary priority. Julian slammed his fists on the table, standing up so fast his chair skidded across the floor. "What the hell are you talking about? The estate is worth $450,000. My half is $225,000. You can't give her my money." "It isn't your money, Mr. Julian," Mr. Vance said firmly. "Creditor claims must be satisfied before a single penny reaches beneficiaries." After reimbursing Clara's secured lien and paying the administrative fees, the net remaining value of the estate is exactly -$400. Julian stood there frozen, his mouth agape as the blood drained entirely from his face. "Negative? What do you mean negative? Where is my money?" "There is no money left for you," Mr. Vance said simply. "Your inheritance share is $0. The panic set in instantly. Julian began hyperventilating, turning to his attorney in desperation. He blurted out that he had already taken out a massive high-interest personal loan using his expected inheritance as collateral to put the down payment on his luxury yacht. Without that $225,000 payout, he was completely ruined. His attorney quietly gathered his briefcase, turned to Julian, and said, "My retainer is exhausted. If you want to contest this, it will cost you another $10,000 upfront." Then he walked out of the room. Julian collapsed back into his chair, burying his face in his hands as reality crashed down on him. Because he refused to pay his fair share of $71,000 when our father was dying, he lost all $225,000 of his inheritance, defaulted on his boat loan, and was left facing personal bankruptcy and mountain-high legal fees. I gathered my papers, zipped up my bag, and stood over him. He looked up at me with desperate, tear-filled eyes, pleading, "Clara, please. You're my sister. You can't do this to me." I looked down at him, feeling no anger, no regret, and no sadness. Only absolute peace. "I handled the paperwork, Julian," I said quietly. "Just like you told me to." I turned my back on him and walked out into the bright, warm morning sun, carrying full financial freedom, my head held high, and total peace in my heart.